Hi, George Haas here. Today I wanted to talk about the fourth module of meditation interventions for the addiction process, which is called Difficult Interpersonal Relationships as Causal to Relapse. We are herd animals, and we really are meant to live in social groups. We're evolutionarily adapted to that. One of the bases of addiction is that you learn through your early conditioning with your caregivers that other people aren't reliable enough to count on. And one of the main areas in which this happens is in our willingness to become so close to other people that we allow them to emotionally co-regulate us. If you are ever around small children or have had small children, what you may notice is that they go through a cycle of distress when their abandonment concerns arise. Maybe you notice they put their arms up like this when they want to be picked up. If you're around a secure child with no real facial expression, with no real attention to anyone in particular, they just put their arms up because they have the expectation that someone will come and take care of them. But if nobody comes, what you may notice is a bewildered look overtakes the child. And if nobody comes, then they whimper. If you've ever been at a party with a lot of small children, you may have been standing in a circle of adults, and then all of a sudden one pricks up. They've heard in that cacophony of children their particular child's whimper, and off they go to try and attend to them, because they know that if they don't get there at the whimper stage, the whimper will turn into an intermittent cry. The intermittent cry will turn into a continuous cry, and the continuous cry will turn into a full-blown tantrum. As an adult, we still are capable of this tantrum mode, and if you've had one recently, maybe you understand how painful they are, how distressing they are to be in that level of emotional dysregulation. We all want to be brilliant at regulating our emotion, being really capable at doing it, but at the same time also understanding that it's perfectly ordinary in daily life to get so far off balance emotionally that you're unable to right yourself. It's these moments in life when if you're surrounded by people who are willing to co-regulate you and are good at it, you simply turn to one of them, and in 10 or 15, 20 minutes, you're back in emotional balance. But if you don't have someone like that, then the distress of the tantrum mode increases. In social isolation, probably the biggest cause of relapse in addicts, the experience, the internal experience that we're addressing in lapsing into reuse is to address this internal tantrum mode. Interpersonal relationships can easily trigger very intense emotional experiences, and our capacity to regulate them and to turn to other people to help us co-regulate when we can't do it for ourselves is the whole world of this interpersonal relationships. I like to talk about this as attachment theory. John Bowlby was an English psychiatrist who developed this theory after World War II. It's new if you're using the spectrum of time that our collective lives on the planet have been. He presented this in the 1980s, so really 30 years of understanding relationship dynamics through attachment theory. After the Second World War, the British government wanted to know whether the separation that children faced during the Blitz, you may remember your world history during the Second World War, Germany bombed London, And the British government responded by taking the children that were in London, that had no other place to go through family resources, and remove them to the countryside so that they would be safe from the devastation of London. The government wanted to know whether that separation was something that would provide or cause lifelong harm that the government then would have to provide services for. So they taxed John Bowlby with the investigation of this. And what he discovered was that these kinds of separations, small children from their primary caregivers, did in fact lead to lifelong challenges for the children who were separated. He then wanted to understand in what way these separations, these losses affected children, and whether it was predictable, something that was part of the nature of being human. And so he hired a researcher, Mary Ainsworth, to come up with a means of investigating this. She invented a research protocol called the strange situation, where caregivers and children's relationship dynamics are tested in the lab. And without going into too much detail about this, what they discovered from the strange situation is that interactions between parent and child, particularly the kind of care that a child receives, results in a very predictable pattern of a view of your sense of self, your sense of competency, and also what type of relationship dynamics you have or that you work with in life. The first time they did this strange situation with small children was around 10 months of age, that these caring dynamics between mother and child, or father and child, depending on who is the primary caregiver, formed lifelong patterns of behavior and relationship that were present very young. So 10 months old, already you're reacting to the conditioning that you faced and have made decisions about yourself, your competency, and also made decisions about the rest of us and how we'll show up for you in relationship. In securely attached children, they view themselves as capable of getting their needs met, and they view the world as filled with people who will meet their needs. And this is a learning process, nonverbal, these early exchanges with the caregiver. So imagine yourself, a 2-month-old infant, completely dependent on care from someone else to survive in the world. You cry out to the world for care. You have no language to communicate this, really just a kind of being. And then somebody comes and they attune to you, they empathetically connect to you, they understand what you need, and then they provide that for you. If over and over again your early experience is to call out to the world for care, and the world responds with good enough care, that translates into a working model of yourself, the thing that you think about yourself, how you hold yourself as somebody who's capable of getting their needs met. And this is learned through the actual experiences you have. You also develop a working model of the world, the working model of other people in the world, as people who will respond to you, respond to your requests for care, and provide good enough care. But if this isn't what happened to you when you were a child, you develop alternative views. Let's say you're an anxious avoidant child. That is to say that when you cry out to the world for your attachment needs to be met, over and over again you face rejection. Your needs are not addressed. What kind of outcome can we expect that to produce in a child? And through Bowlby and Ainsworth, this pattern of experience, this pattern of care produced a child that has given up on getting their attachment requests met through other people and turned to a kind of solitary exploration. They view other people in the world, this is this working model of the world that's developed in a child whose needs are so consistently rejected, as incapable really of meeting their needs. And so they develop a sense of morality that allows them to take from other people whatever they want, because their belief is that they're incapable of meeting their needs. They're incapable of being in a peer kind of relationship. But let's say your experience as an infant was inconsistent care. One time you made a request and the care was provided. Second time you made a similar request and it was ignored altogether. Another time you made a similar request and the care that you received was not what you wanted, not what would be helpful to you. This would be called an anxious ambivalent child. This person develops the view that they're not competent to get their needs met, but they see everyone else as capable of meeting their needs, so that really all that they need to do is hook up with somebody, and that's the way that they can get care for themselves. Mary Main was a woman that Mary Ainsworth hired to assist her in research at Johns Hopkins when they were doing this early research. And she partnered with Eric Hesse, and they're now both at UC Berkeley. They continued Bowlby's research and Ainsworth's research and discovered an additional category of child. This was a child that was disorganized in their approach to attachment. This produces a fearful avoidant adult. Fearful avoidant adults have the view that they're incapable of getting their needs met. And they view the world as filled with people actually who would harm them if they expressed their need for care. So these four distinct views in attachment. A secure person, and we're talking about adult attachment categories now. A secure adult sees themselves as capable of getting their needs met, and they see the world as willing to meet their needs. A dismissing adult sees themselves actually as very competent, but they see the rest of us as incompetent, and that provides for them a moral justification to take whatever they want. A preoccupied adult on the helpless end of the scale views themselves as incapable of getting their needs met, but they see everyone else as capable of meeting their needs. So all they have to do is meet someone to take care of them. On the fearful, preoccupied end, that helpless presentation becomes a chaotic, angry demand for care. The fearful avoidant adult is someone who sees themselves as incapable, and they see the world as hostile to meeting their needs. We'll talk more about this over the coming weeks, but these kinds of views from the Buddhist perspective, right view, wrong view, or right understanding, wrong understanding, affect the way that we perceive ourselves and the world. And so from these distorted perspectives, if we're not in a secure place, lead to karma. We take actions in the world based on our view. And then we form relationships around these mistaken views. And then that informs the dynamics of relationship. Fearful avoidant adults have a 70% rate of addiction, so it's one of the highest groups affected by addiction. Dismissing adults, one study shows 30% people with addiction in this attachment category. So these different kinds of attachment views also have a correlation with addiction. Thanks.